So this week I'd like to talk about this CNN article which has been really doing the rounds. It's called Israeli Soldiers Returning from War Struggle with Trauma and Suicide. It focuses on an Israeli soldier called Eliran Mizrahi. And even though CNN is not by any means the most extreme or, far out media outlet, they immediately start doing that thing that we've seen over and over again in the media, which is that they immediately humanise this Israeli guy, and they don't bother to do the same for the Palestinians that they mention further down in the article. So they call him a 40-year-old father of four. They talk about his family. They speak to his mother, to his sister. They talk about his mental health and his well-being. They talk about his job and his life that he had before he was in the Israeli military. They go to enormous lengths to make us see this person as a human being. They don't bother to do that when it comes to the Palestinians that they mention in the article. They also do that thing of, as soon as they mention the situation, they say he was deployed to Gaza, and then they immediately say, after the deadly Hamas-led attack on Israel on October the 7th, 2023. They don't say, which incidentally happened in a bigger context, decades of occupation and oppression, apartheid, the Nakba, the blockade, like all kinds of stuff which they don't mention that put it into context. All the thousands and thousands of Palestinians who've been killed by Israel since 1948, and indeed the thousands and thousands who've been taken hostage, who've been taken prisoner, who've had their lives absolutely destroyed, who've been hurt, beaten up, brutalised, all kinds of stuff. None of that gets mentioned. It just says, like, after the deadly Hamas-led attack on October the 7th. Eliran Mizrahi came back from his deployment, and they then say he was struggling with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm really uncomfortable, to be honest, with the sort of medicalisation of this. We know from social media footage that Mizrahi himself put out. He was seen standing on demolished buildings in front of graffiti, celebrating what he was doing in Palestine, and then they call it he was suffering from PTSD. I mean, first of all, he really seems to be enjoying himself in those social media clips, right? Was he suffering from PTSD, or was he suffering from guilt? Because if you're reacting to trauma that's been done to you, then I don't think it's a disorder. I think it's natural to react to trauma that's been done to you. But if you are the one that inflicted the trauma, it's pretty unreasonable to go and kill people and then say, I'm really traumatised by what I've just done, isn't it? He was due to redeploy, and he then committed suicide, right? And I think suicide is terrible, and I'm absolutely in favour of making sure that we take enormous steps to make sure that we don't have people in our society committing suicide. But the first step we could have taken in this circumstance is not conscripting him into the Israeli army and not sending him to Gaza to go and commit atrocities, right? That would be the best way to have protected his mental health. They then sort of casually mention that more than 42,000 people have been killed in Gaza, with the United Nations reporting that most of the dead are women and children. But like not naming anybody, not humanising anybody, not even like, it's so unbalanced and so unreasonable to write about these things in this way. For many soldiers, the war in Gaza is a fight for Israel's survival that must be won by any means. Okay, sure, they've been indoctrinated with some absolute garbage that they've been told to justify this war. But the battle is also taking a mental toll. I really think that people in Palestine wish they had time to stop and think about the impact of what's happening on their mental health, because they don't have time to dig their own relatives out of the rubble. It's just a whole different scale, and articles like this are so misleading. Mizrahi was deployed to Gaza on October the 8th last year and was tasked with driving a D9 bulldozer, a 62-tonne armoured vehicle that can withstand bullets and explosives. You know what can't withstand bullets and explosives? Palestinian children. It's absolutely disgusting that they write about all this stuff without taking the time to humanise the Palestinian civilians who are being slaughtered. They then go on to interview his colleague in the IDF, a guy called Guy Zakin, the co-driver of this bulldozer that he was tasked with driving. He says, we saw very, very, very difficult things that are difficult to accept. He says, on many occasions, soldiers had to run over terrorists, dead and alive, in the hundreds. First of all, you do not have time to check that hundreds of people are definitely terrorists. There's no way that you can do that. You're just running over people, aren't you? You've got no idea who's a terrorist and who isn't. He even says, there is no such thing as citizens. They're all terrorists, he says. And then he sort of backtracks on it and says, oh, we did see some civilians and we gave them some water and some food, which seems like he's trying to come across as a nice guy. But of course, if Israel wasn't blocking aid from getting in to Gaza, there wouldn't be any need for IDF soldiers to hand out a little few crumbs from their rations. Then he goes on to say, this guy Zakin, he says, they had to run over people in their hundreds. Everything squirts out. Yeah, he's talking about human bodies being run over by a bulldozer. People with lives and hopes and dreams and families who cared about one another and loved each other. He says he can't eat meat anymore because of the gruesome scenes. First of all, he has come to see Palestinian people as meat. And secondly, I really think people in Palestine would be delighted if their biggest issue in life was whether to become vegetarian or not. You know, I've seen documentaries about the meat industry, and I do think that, you know, I often think it would be a good idea for me to give up meat completely. I don't think that my problems in wrestling with that concept are on anything like the scale of the problems that people are facing in Palestine. The fact is that what's going on right now is not, as this article seems to suggest, Israel defending itself. It's not a war on Hamas, which is another phrase that they use. It's a genocide. We know that it's a genocide. The other thing they haven't mentioned is that one possible reason for Mizrahi's suicide is also that some of the social media footage he had put up of himself celebrating the actions that he'd been taking in Palestine had appeared in a documentary about war crimes and the way that they were being documented on social media, and there was wide speculation that there might be an ICC arrest warrant put out for him on suspicion of war crimes. I'm not saying that his suicide is in any way a good thing. I mean, I think it's really important, actually, that if people are accused of war crimes, we actually arrest them, and then we can find out what exactly has been going on and who else is complicit and where these orders have come from and who's carrying them out and what safety checks have been undertaken and all of the rest. But the focus has to be on the thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinians, the vast majority of them women and children, according to the United Nations, who have been killed by the IDF's actions. We have to stop providing weapons, military support, diplomatic support. We have to start to Israel, and we immediately have to start putting sanctions on them, doing whatever we can to speak out against them and prevent them from ploughing on with this horrific genocide. And as it happens, a side effect of that is that it will be better for Israeli men and women who might otherwise get conscripted and be forced to participate in these things. I don't know about Mizrahi himself, but I'm absolutely certain that there are many people who don't want to do this. And we know that there are people refusing conscription bravely in Israel. And it's better for everyone if this war ends. And the only way that it can end is either continuing until the whole region is a desolate wasteland and everybody involved will be grotesquely traumatised for generations to come, or we sit around a table and we have ceasefire talks. We talk about peace and how we can do that. And we have to do whatever we can to bring that latter about, starting now. Starting a year ago. See you next week. Increasingly, the mainstream media is terrible at informing the public of what is really going on. I'm only able to make these videos because people are generous enough to sponsor me making them, and if you're able to be a part of that, I would hugely appreciate it. It can cost as little as $1 a month and you'll get loads of fun bonus content and lots of extras from me and my undying gratitude. I also massively appreciate it if you're able to like, share these videos and let people out there know what's going on.